Now we'd like to hear from Secretary Moniz. For those of you who didn't know the Secretary in his prior lives at DOE or MIT, you certainly do now, as he's been a familiar face in TV, congressional hearings, major domestic and international venues promoting the nation's abundant and diversified energy sources. So it's great pleasure that I introduce Secretary of Energy Ernie Moniz.
Well, thank you, Chuck, or Jim, or actually Chuck and I have had long-running conversations, particularly on the Eastern Mediterranean. It hasn't gotten easier, has it? But I really appreciate it, and of course, very pleased to receive this report on emergency response and preparedness, and looking forward, of course, to the Arctic report shortly. And really want to repeat the thanks to both Marv and Peggy and Rex and Carol. I think this really does show a tremendous level of commitment and effort, and I know of many, many more as well, but it's really very much appreciated. You know, last year, in talking to the council, I did suggest that we, I think as Chuck essentially has alluded to, that we change a little bit the character of some of the reports that have been done by the council over the years, and maybe focusing a bit more on more streamlined, focused reports and actionable outcomes. The actionable is certainly there, and going from casts of thousands to hundreds really is an order of magnitude step in terms of the focusing in on particular issues, and so that's really appreciated. I was going to say my colleague John Deutsch, of course when I get up he leaves. Just note that actually John, in addition to being on the NPC, and the NPC is a group, again, as we've seen right just now, whose advice we really are seeking. I would just mention that Professor Deutsch is also the chairman of our Secretary of Energy Advisory Board, so it's another channel for advice, and having the overlap of those two actually is quite useful. I do want to, earlier was mentioned a set of new players at the Department of Energy, and I'd like to say a few more words about that. First and foremost, our Deputy Secretary, Liz Sherwood Randall. Liz took up the post early October, so she's nearing the quarter pole with another 8 quarters to go after this one. I just want to say Liz was most recently a special assistant to President Obama and White House coordinator for defense policy, countering weapons of mass destruction, and arms control. She oversaw various efforts removing chemical weapons from Syria, and implementation of the President's nuclear security agenda. As I think most of you know, in addition to the issues that we are discussing today, the Department has a substantial responsibility for this country's nuclear security agenda, and I'll just say that's where I really first met Liz, appreciated her intellect, organizational clarity, and I might say synchronous worldviews, all very good qualities for being a partner with me in advancing the department's business. I also want to recognize Dan Poneman, who is the longest serving Deputy Secretary at the department, and his commitment to stay beyond 5 years. And it was a completely seamless transition, literally from one day to the next, and so we owe Dan also a major debt of gratitude. And of course, we have the former and current co-chairs of government co-chairs of your study groups, and you'll be hearing from Liz in a few minutes. On the confirmation side, many of you also know it's been a pretty slow grind for a while, but things are looking up, and in particular on the energy team. Yesterday, we swore in 2 members of that team into their new posts. One, Franklin Orr from Stanford. I think probably many of you know him. He should be well known in the hydrocarbon community from his research. He also helped build up arguably the second best university energy program at Stanford, and some of you who helped do that are here. Ellen Williams, another one you may know. Ellen has been a very distinguished professor of material science for a long time at the University of Maryland. I noted yesterday after swearing her in that when I was head of physics at MIT, I tried to hire her 22 years ago. It did not work, but I am persistent, and she is now the head of ARPA-E, but you may also know her last position prior to that was as chief scientist at BP. So she also comes with a very considerable knowledge about this field. And then Chris Smith, who has actually been effectively doing the job, heading fossil energy, but now confirmed. We still need some paperwork done, but he will very soon be officially in the job, and I think you know the job that he does. So all 3 of these newly empowered individuals really have very deep connections to this community, and I think we will welcome, of course, further interaction. Coming to you today, obviously this group is very familiar with the fact that we are in a pretty dynamic time in the energy industry with the domestic production. I don't need to give this group the story there, but one thing of relevance actually to some of the discussions, particularly on the emergency preparedness, is the different geography of production, of course, has major implications on infrastructure and supply chains, and I'll come back to that in terms of what we are doing in our quadrennial energy review. We've had just recently state actions, North Dakota, New York, which we will all have to understand. North America, I will come back to this. On Monday, we held, for the first time in 7 years, a trilateral meeting of the energy ministers of Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And certainly one of the major features there was getting a very in-depth understanding of the energy reform in Mexico, which is quite breathtaking in its scope, its ambition, clearly with major implications for this business. We could go on and on with infrastructure challenges and continued cost reduction in renewables, a different story. Demand side success leading to challenge of a variety of business models. Certainly that's true in the utility business. So it's the Ukraine-Russia situation and energy security looking beyond our borders to the shared responsibilities and implications of energy insecurity of our allies and friends. So we've got a lot on the table to work through, and we certainly at the department want to stay in close touch with the industry, make sure we understand your perspectives and get your suggestions on a whole variety of issues. The last one, actually, I should have also mentioned, maybe particularly in the context of the recent last month's announcement, President Obama and President Xi, in terms of going forward on the road to Paris for climate change. Again, another major issue that we all need to deal with. Let me say a few words about the trilateral meeting, because I think it's of interest, and I say I think the reform agenda in Mexico is of great import, I think, for North America and for the global market, and for opportunities, obviously, for our industry. It was first of all, let me say it was a very, very productive meeting. There were several areas where we are moving forward. One, Adam Szyminski could tell you more about. We are committed, and we signed an MOU to move forward on much better data integration among the three countries. That includes export-import flows of various commodities. I think this group knows very well at least the kinds of flows in the oil and gas sector across both borders, but perhaps less well known is the fact that we are today, for example, net importers of electricity from Mexico, as well as Canada, of course. Getting better and agreed to maps of energy infrastructure, particularly the integration of energy infrastructure that we already have and that will only increase going forward. So Adam and EIA are our point person for that. We will also be looking at sharing information in terms of sustainability and best practices in production. Of course, and in Mexico, with the extension of the Eagle Ford, there's certainly a strong interest in shale, as well as other resources, deep water, Gulf, et cetera. We will be looking to extend the kinds of work we are doing on the Quadrennial Energy Review in terms of understanding infrastructure needs going forward, including resilient infrastructure, again, a topic quite relevant to the report that Marv led. In fact, coming out of the discussion, we went in with these three areas to discuss, and we are moving forward in all three of those areas. However, we came out with a much longer list of other areas that are of clear trilateral interest. One of those was a very strong interest in looking at emergency preparedness and response across the borders. And certainly some of the issues that were mentioned, looking ahead to waivers and et cetera, there were issues with state borders. Now we're talking national borders. And we saw those problems as well in Sandy as Canada responded with assets to help us, but we had a few problems at the border in terms of timeliness of that response. So that's going to be another issue, and I think it was John who mentioned that looking at these issues would be important, and somehow we may wish to take that up a little bit as an extension of the report. There were other areas. Again, it was a long list. I'll just mention one other one, which we are very focused on, actually, our Mexican colleague, Minister Joaquin Colwell, was the one who first brought it up to the enthusiastic response of all of us, and that is the human capacity challenges, the workforce development in the industry. Another very interesting energy industry challenge as the reform agenda not only opens up direct opportunities in the hydrocarbon sector, but also, I remind you, it's also electricity reform at the same time. But in general, as their, let's say, regulatory structures come much more in line with those of the United States and Canada, the issue of mobility, not only of infrastructure, but of people, becomes a very, very interesting issue. So we will also be looking at the human capacity questions. And here, I want to say the department, we have been working hard on a women in energy agenda, on a minorities in energy agenda. We have just created and are in the process of setting up a jobs strategy council that is department-wide to be looking at these issues of jobs and training. And I want to give a little call out. I don't know if Jack Gerard is here, but Jack and API have stepped forward in partnership with us, particularly on the minorities in energy agenda, running regional meetings across the country, specifically to look at building up our workforce and drawing upon the underrepresented communities in our workforce. looking out at this audience, I'm sorry to say, does not in any way contradict the demographic challenges we see in this industry in terms of building up our future workforce. So that was a very, very, I think, productive, meeting, and one that we will also convert into an action agenda. Let me say a few words about the Quadrennial Energy Review. For those of you who don't know, I'm not going to go into great detail, but because many of you do know, we are putting together a multi-year effort looking at how we bring together all of the equities and threads that come into a coherent energy policy across the entire government. I mean, that's the key. We are the Department of Energy, but as you know, the equities in energy span the government, basically. Defense and state and commerce and agriculture and interior, and we go on and on and on. And so what we are doing is, I discussed this last year, but some of you probably weren't there. What we're doing is taking a first bite this year, and that first bite, it's a pretty big bite, but it isn't at least the whole apple, is on energy infrastructure. So transporting, storing, and distributing energy is the focus. As I already alluded to, and as we have learned much more about, we have a lot of infrastructure challenges, partly driven by the success, actually, and the new geography of some of the production. We will be issuing that first installment at the end of January. There's been a tremendous amount of analysis and multi-agency collaboration under White House chairmanship to bring all these threads together, and that's something that would be great to be able to come back and to discuss in more depth once we have that first review prepared. I mean, just as examples of some of the things that we will be coming out with. Our infrastructure focus is not just on what you might call the energy infrastructure per se, but because, for example, right now, one of the challenges is what you might call the associated infrastructures. Trains, waterways. Frankly, and this is something that I certainly learned a lot more about in the last 6 months. We have huge issues around waterways that have to be addressed. So we will be having some recommendations there. On the other hand, and we'll be expect to be posting some of these analysis papers soon. On the other hand, in looking at the natural gas transmission infrastructure in a world in which natural gas continues to get additional electricity market share, to be honest, the analysis finds that there are not enormous, call them continental scale requirements. There will be some regional requirements, but there, in contrast to my earlier point, this is a case where probably the challenge is somewhat less than we might have, at least I might have thought going into the analysis. So that gives you a flavor of the kind of thing that we'll be doing. And as I say, this will be, we are targeting the end of January for that first installment. I might also add, and this is particularly relevant to what Rex talked about in terms of the Arctic, that another activity under that umbrella, in a certain sense, is the Quadrennial Technology Review. Some of you might have been in the big jamboree a couple of weeks ago on this, but whatever the case, in the spring, we expect to be coming out with the Quadrennial Technology Review, which, as it suggests, is going to focus down on our technology programs going forward, and there, the Arctic report is one that we will look forward to because it's, again, very, very timely coming into that. It's timely, obviously, in terms of the U.S. chairmanship of the Arctic Council, starting April 1st, but it's also timely in terms of intersecting with our quadrennial technology review. On the Arctic study coming forward, I'm not going to repeat all the things that were said in terms of the opportunity. We know it's there, and we will wait for some of the specific suggestions going forward. Just want to say that with that chairmanship of the Arctic Council, it's clear that we will be doing more there. We will be doing more also bilaterally with Canada. Mexico has a little bit less interest in the Arctic at the moment, but certainly bilaterally with Canada we'll be doing a lot. And I'd just like to say that, well, first of all, I had a terrific visit in Alaska in August and got a chance to see some things, including the University of Alaska Fairbanks, I know is represented here today, and a nearby small, kind of but interesting permafrost laboratory that's actually run by the Army Corps of Engineers. This obviously doesn't apply to the offshore conventional production, but it is another issue that I think we need to look at with changes, with global warming, with changes in the permafrost. We have a whole variety of challenges to look at, and as I say, there's now been there's an interesting little laboratory there with some longitudinal data in terms of studying the permafrost that might be interesting to look at. Another area, and it was mentioned in the presentation, that there was first of all a meeting in Alaska, including meeting with Alaska native communities and corporations. That is another area that in the Arctic area we will be looking at in terms of the rather dramatic energy needs of those communities, and that may be another opportunity for us to come back and think about some of our joint work. On the emergency preparedness study, I might also say, of course, in other activities that we currently are carrying out relevant to the Arctic region are things like this is a much longer term issue than the study, but methane hydrates, for example, are another area that we will continue to work on. Turning to the emergency preparedness study, and Liz Sherwood-Randall is going to say a lot more about this, and as the government co-chair, I'll just say make a couple of points. The Department of Energy has got a pretty complex mission space. The whimsical summary is weapons and windmills, quarks and quagmires. So we have nuclear security, we have energy, we are a backbone of the American scientific research enterprise, and we have the responsibility of cleaning up the Cold War mess. Those are our four kind of historic mission areas. I might say that energy emergency response preparedness is kind of like a new mission for us, and that's why this is really very important discussion. The department has had historically a major role in emergency response, but that's been emergency response for nuclear emergencies, where obviously the expertise is in our laboratories almost exclusively, and it's an inherently government function. We are committed to building up, and we are responsible for building up emergency response now in the energy sector, which is a very, very different kettle of fish, given, of course, the fact that the infrastructure is in the private sector mostly. Okay, we have our power marketing administrations, et cetera, but fundamentally dealing with the private sector. And many of the discussions that we heard this morning in the report, of course, if it wasn't entirely explicit, certainly implicitly strongly raised this issue of how does the private sector, and especially one that was discussed that in fact has more players in the value chain now, and the department, how do we work together in advancing that? Again, now, the recommendations, I think, were right on, but again, I'll let Liz come back to that. But I do want to, again, thank the NPC for this, but also to say that, I think we both have a lot to learn as to how we build this up into an effective response capability. And going to Amory's point, certainly the interdependencies of these infrastructures are very, very critical. And that is something that we will take on at some level in the quadrennial energy review. Again, natural events, as Amory summarized, cyber, geomagnetic storms, physical attacks, we can go on and on. The question is, how are we going to design or help guide from the government side infrastructure evolution for the next decades that gets us where we want to go in terms of economic transactional capacity, security, resilience, et cetera, and also have the response, preparedness and response capacity for when things go wrong. And again, it's going to be a while, but I think we have to keep making progress every year. We kind of use certain things like cybersecurity, of course, are not particularly weather dependent, but we kind of use hurricane season as a good marker for our annual work. And again, I want to recognize in terms of the industry that again, actually with API for the last season, we had some very good collaboration in terms of developing supply chain awareness as related to emergency response. We just want to keep working with the industry year after year and keep building up that capacity as we can. So again, thanks very much to the leaders and the participants in both studies. We know this was takes a lot of effort, which we really appreciate. We will commit to being partners in translating this into action, because again, that's what we like to do with the NPC, is have these reports that are focused on an area and are translatable into action. And Chuck, it's time to get a new agenda in place for the next 2 years. Thank you very much. Oh, should I have introduced Liz?
You did already.
You did.
All right.
You did.
Good morning, and thank you, Ernie. I appreciated the generous introduction and your warm welcome to the department. I also want to thank our colleagues, first to Chuck and to Jim Hackett in absentia. Today would have been his last day in the chair for the NPC, and we have appreciated his great leadership. Thanks to Rex and to Carol for your tremendous work, to Marvin and to Peggy as well. And I want to thank Paula Gant, who has been the wingwoman for the NPC on both of these studies. And your many contributions have been invaluable. Finally, to Dan Poneman, who handed the baton to me in October, as the Secretary said. In particular, your work in advancing the efforts in emergency preparedness and response have been path-breaking, and I'm so fortunate to benefit from what you did, Dan, that I can now carry forward. We had excellent discussions in November at the committee's meeting in Houston, and also in several conference calls in preparation for today. And the recommendations on emergency preparedness are, as Marvin indicated, not rocket science. They're pretty simple and straightforward. What we have to do is implement them. Our job is to build, maintain, and exercise the connections, the communications, and the processes necessary for effective emergency management and response. And as the Secretary said, we are committed to action. The Council's report is invaluable in this regard. And I would note in particular the final page that was added on implementation, which gives us a roadmap, including timelines for getting things done. We've already started the necessary planning to better harmonize our emergency response team structure with the National Response Framework and the National Incident Management System, as was recommended in the report. And while we still have work to do, we are closer to operating by a common playbook, meaning that the people involved in emergency response can easily understand their roles and responsibilities and how to communicate with one another. We will find the best way to integrate EIA subject matter expertise into the DOE-wide emergency response team in a permanent and meaningful manner without stepping on Adam's autonomy. And we'll also be including and we'll also be including key industry partners in the planning, documentation, and testing of our processes as we move forward. What we talked about at our November meeting in Houston was how much leadership matters, and that's why your presence here today is so important. In past emergencies, we have seen firsthand how important it is to engage with senior leaders who have the authority to make decisions quickly, even when those decisions may carry financial consequences. During Hurricane Sandy, we brought together the highest levels of the federal government, including the president and the highest levels of industry, to share information and make decisions that would not have been possible or as rapid at a lower level in these respective organizations. At our meeting in November, former Houston Mayor Bill White, who I don't see in the audience today, told a vivid example about handling Hurricane Katrina as we were discussing regulatory issues, when tens of thousands of people flooded into Houston and needed their prescriptions, but had no money, no credit cards, no nothing, and certainly not the pieces of paper that would have provided them with the capacity to fill them. To fill prescriptions, companies like CVS, Walgreens, and Walmart were in a situation in which they had to take financial and legal risk. They would likely lose money and potentially violate a lot of regulations if they made those medications available to displaced people. But with assurances from members of Congress that a regulatory fix would be on the way, leadership at these companies determined that the right thing to do was to provide prescription services in order to save lives. We learned from that, and we know that going forward we need to look, as was mentioned earlier, at the regulatory issues that might face us in a crisis and try to pre-position responses so that we don't lose precious time. We want to take this opportunity also to institutionalize key relationships, including streamlining the communications between DOE and industry liaisons for improved situational awareness and more effective response. And again, leadership here is very important. I'm encouraged by your commitment and the investments that have been made by people in this room in establishing, maintaining, and exercising your emergency response processes within your own companies, among yourselves, and now as we move forward to try to exercise together, which is a key element of the recommendations in this report. We want to do this work together, and I very much appreciate the pledge that the study sets forth that industry will work with us to ensure that we have the means to call quickly on senior executives when time is of the essence. As was noted, the Oil and Natural Gas Sector Coordinating Council has done great work to create a trusted relationship with DOE and has helped provide timely information during emergencies. The Council has also worked with the electricity sector to contribute to the new energy sector-specific plan, which is in final stages of review. I want to build on this work and raise it up, and what I've asked is to add an element to the Oil and Gas Subsector Coordinating Council that brings together executives under its auspices, because thus far the work with the oil and gas sector has been done at a working level. During Hurricane Sandy, we learned a lot the hard way about interconnections with the electricity subsector and the importance of real-time information and communication between this sector and the energy and the electric sector. We had to know where we had fuels and no electricity, and where we had electricity but no fuel. We needed to know where to send utility trucks to refuel and where to send fuel trucks. We've made a lot of progress at the technical level on developing situational awareness, but what I want to make sure is that we are building and testing the needed relationships across sectors in advance of crisis. So with your support, I want to enable the Oil and Natural Gas Subsector Coordinating Council to interface directly with the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council. This would involve identifying senior leaders that will represent the oil and gas sector when interfacing with electricity sector CEOs. In a steady state, these routine discussions can be strategic and look to anticipate policy challenges given the dynamic threat landscape. And there I would just note what Amory Lovin said, the work that we can do to prepare for natural disasters will posture us much better in the face of man-made threats that are evident to all of us. Related efforts would include a tabletop exercise involving senior DOE and industry leaders from both the oil and gas sector and the electricity sector to test our communication and coordination mechanisms. As we all know from our own experience, there will be gaps in any emergency response plan, and I've learned in the years that I've worked on national security issues, every time I exercise, I'm surprised by those gaps. And this enables us to prepare better for what we will face. I learned in Houston that this industry prefers to use the word drilling in place of exercising, and I'm glad to call it drilling. What we need to do is drill together to ensure that we're ready in advance of crises. I'll shift now briefly to the Arctic study, which is underway, as you know. I've been so appreciative of the work that has been done thus far, and here your leadership is vitally important. During the last Arctic Steering Committee meeting with Rex and others, I offered to put together a broader strategic presentation for the group on the context within which the oil and gas sector is operating in the Arctic region. And so what I would propose to do is come to Houston prepared to present that to the meeting that we anticipate having early in February. With that, I want to thank you again for all of your work and underscore how ready the Secretary and I are to put your ideas into action. I look forward to working immediately together to enhance our emergency preparedness. As was noted, hurricane season is a good marker for us in terms of preparation and response, but we need to be ready all year around for what may surprise us and what we want to be prepared to respond to. Mr. Secretary, I believe we are willing to take a few questions if you still have time.
I have a couple
Is that
of
correct?
statements to make yet.
Excellent. All right,
Thank
well,
you.
I'll cede the podium to you. Thank you.
Yeah, well, this was the time in the program when I would say a few words of thanks to Jim Hackett. Now, I don't know, maybe he's listening in on the website, but if you are, thanks very much for your 2 years of chairmanship. Might also note that he really championed, I think, the 2011 NPC study on prudent development. Marshall, correct, right? And that, of course, had a theme of the importance of stakeholder engagement, which is a thread, I think, in both of these reports coming up. So thanks for that, Jim. I would also be presenting him a gift from the Department of Energy, and while we have complete confidence in Chuck, we'll just mail it to him directly. So again, thanks to Jim Hackett.
Pretty much stay up just for questions.
Oh yes, okay. And as Liz says, yeah, we could take a few questions.
Yep. Right there. I think there is a microphone. If you want to wait just a second, he'll bring it to you. Please go ahead, and as you have a question, to identify yourself and your organization just for the benefit of the record.
Scott Tinker, University of Texas. And Ernie, I'd say MIT and Stanford are second and third in energy, but that's just my bias. So there's been a noticeable change, I think, in understanding of energy in DC. So Ernie, I congratulate you on that and the team you've put together. You mentioned talent, and we call that the great crew change in this industry. Research support at universities is critical for talent. Currently, U.S. federal support for oil and gas research, let's just say, is anemic at best, and particularly with RIPSI going away, which was small even there. You know, that has been called corporate welfare. I guess this industry is unique in that corporate welfare because many other industries receive plenty of federal welfare. But it's been called corporate welfare for that kind of support here. It's a term I've heard and seen in testimony to Congress many times. With shale, there's a real opportunity for fundamental research. It's going to go on for decades. We're right at the beginning of understanding their basic research. And so I want to ask, since action seems to be the word of the day, what are the DOE's action plans for supporting oil and gas research with competitive funding at universities in the U.S.?
Okay, well, I'll start on that, and then if Liz wants to comment, but certainly Chris Smith, I think, should as well comment on the R&D agenda. Certainly, we all recognize that the oil and gas research agenda, particularly post the RIPSI effort, obviously is not on the scale of that in some other areas, renewables, efficiency, et cetera. But I do think that without arguing about the precise amount, I think we are in a place where the industry certainly carries a huge R&D investment. So we do work with, we need to work on those more generic activities, typically with a longer wavelength in terms of going forward. We all know the history in terms of unconventional, in terms of a pretty modest investment back in 1979 to 82 in terms of some characterization work, had a huge impact later on, when amplified, of course, dramatically by the work done in industry. So those are the kinds of things that we will certainly focus on. But let me make some other comments, Scott. First of all, we are taking some new steps. So the following is not called oil and gas explicitly. And by the way, Scott, I can't see you, of course, but there you are. So for example, we have started a so-called cross-cut called subsurface science and technology. And this has relevance to the hydrocarbon business. It also has relevance to engineered geothermal. It has relevance to carbon sequestration. We could go on. And that will be looking at very, very fundamental issues in terms of understanding and potentially have the grounds for managing fractures in the subsurface, for example. It will involve some issues of the linkage between seismic activity and the built environment, which again has many applications. So those are the kinds of areas that we are looking to, Scott. But I will add another thing, which again is not scored as oil and gas or anything else in terms of a fuel, and that is the enormous network of scientific facilities available to the entire research community. And that is, for example, absolutely key tools for a whole set of advanced materials development with broad application. So I think it's not, one shouldn't look only at what is called specifically kind of oil and gas research to understand the breadth of what we do. Chris, would you like to? Oh, I'm sorry. And one other thing I'll just add, going back to how you started the question, which was on human capacity. Another thing that we just started and we just were authorized for in the FY15 omnibus is we would like to build up, and your ideas would be most welcome, traineeship programs. I want to emphasize traineeship programs as different from research assistantships, as different from fellowships. So these are more in the NIH mold, where we identify areas of need in terms of human capacity, attached to our mission, any of our mission space, and then through a competitive process, we'll have universities lead that, be responsible for developing curricula, courses, et cetera, that can be spread to other universities, and build up a workforce, an advanced workforce, in specific areas of Department of Energy mission need. So we are doing some new things along those lines, Scott, that I think are quite relevant.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'll excuse me. I'll be brief. We tend to get called upon after the Secretary's already answered the question in great explicit detail, but I'll build on that in just a couple points. And excuse my voice this morning. The first is.
By the way, Chris, you're confirmed now, so you can be more forward-leaning.
Well, there you go. A new stance here. So a couple of points here. First, we're working very hard to make sure we're defining the appropriate government role for research and development. And that's one thing that we work very closely with a lot of people here in this room. So when you look at the R&D that we manage within the Department of Energy, it tends to be geared towards issues of environmental sustainability and safety. The research and development that's done within the companies tends to be very good at getting companies better at producing, but there's lots of work to be done to understand all of the impacts that from the Arctic through the unconventional drilling could have on, or exploration production activities could have on the public. So everything from protecting groundwater to reducing emissions of methane to surface impacts, those are the areas that we're really leaning into. We had I think a very productive collaboration with RIPC over the last several years. That program was funded through EPAC 2005. That program's now sunsetted, but we still do see some really important work going forward. A last thing that I'll mention is that we have taken some strides in ensuring that the research and development that we do within the Department of Energy is coordinated with that R&D that happens in other agencies. So we aren't the only agency in this space, but one thing that we have done is we've created a single steering team that looks at all of the issues that we do with research and development. There are programs also within EPA, there are programs within USGS. These are all different. We have different skill sets and capabilities, core capabilities within DOE than exist in other agencies. So we want to make sure that the appropriate work is done within DOE's purview in our research and development program, and we want to make sure that the appropriate work is done in the other agencies, and that we are coordinating so that we don't have we have the appropriate level of overlap, B, the right agencies doing the right work, and C, we don't have important areas of research that simply fall between the cracks because the agencies are not talking to each other. So that's an area I think we've made some progress over the last couple of years.
Anything else?
Okay.
Well, Secretary Moniz, as well as Deputy Secretary Sherwood Randall, thank you for your remarks, and we've really been honored to have you here this morning. I know you've got a busy schedule, and I think we're almost wrapping up on our agenda. We'll be covering a few administrative items, so again, we really appreciate you attending with us, and again, thanks also to the chairs of the studies that we have underway. Great progress on the Arctic, and congratulations again on reaching, I would say, not the end, but the midpoint on emergency preparedness as we commit to go ahead. So thanks again so much, and I'm going to take just a second here, because at this point we're going to have a couple announcements. One is our webcast is concluding. So the webcast is going to be turned off. So for those who joined us by the web, we appreciate you listening in. And also I encourage everyone to download and read the emergency preparedness report that will be posted shortly. And then second, for the members of the press here today, for about 5 minutes following the meeting's adjournment, the emergency preparedness study leaders will be available here at the head table to respond to your questions.
Okay, thank you, Chuck.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.